Despite being a multiplayer game, Splatoon has been able to attract a lot of fans for many aspects beyond the online play, as the developers also put a lot of work into elements like the single-player mode, the game's world and its characters. However, due to being an online shooter first and foremost, the previous game's hero modes still had to be fairly limited in their scale, and the marketing even relegating these modes to a way to learn the controls before battling online. With the Octo expansion, we finally received a more elaborate story mode. Although being only a $20 DLC, it also didn't have a huge amount of resources or time to truly realize the full potential the series has as a single-player experience. Luckily though, the hero mode in Splatoon 3 already looks like it's going to be more or at least just as massive as the Octo expansion. So in this video I want to talk about the potential scope and structure of the new hero mode. That also means I won't get too deep into the actual story today, as I'm planning to do a separate video on that. In terms of overall structure, my biggest wish for the new hero mode was that we'd finally move on from the floating platform levels that made up most of Splatoon's single-player gameplay up until now. Rather, I was hoping for the story to take place in the actual world of Inklings or Octarians, and not just have us jump over random artificial constellations of platforms again. Or at least not exclusively. For example, back in the Octarian domes from the first games, we never got to see what an actual Octarian city looks like, aside from the background elements and some concept artwork. And as a converse example, I love the parts of the Octo expansion where we explored the metro in the very beginning, where the areas were naturally connected to each other and looked like a space that had an actual utility for the deep sea residents, before it got abandoned anyway. So this is the kind of stuff I wanted to see more of. Although most of these hopes were pretty much destroyed initially when the Return of the Mammalians trailer dropped and we got another series of floaty platform levels. I know it's much easier to design and develop levels like that, but I was really hoping they'd go for something more ambitious this time. However, from what we've seen, there are still so many weird things that are unclear that make me feel like there's something bigger to the hero mode we might not know about yet. So maybe not all hope is lost? Even though we've seen the return of the classic floaty platform gameplay, the story trailer also showed a decent amount of stuff from the story hub world, and it looks like they're going for a more, let's say, organic kind of level design, where we have this natural terrain in a fairly large looking open environment, at least compared to Octo Valley or Canyon. So that's a step into the direction I'd like to see at least. Seeing how expansive this area seems to be, I hope that this is our first hint that the story hub world will have more proper gameplay in it this time, and that this type of area will be a bigger part of the game, aside from the levels in the dome. But what caught my attention the most is the following. While the Squid Sisters and Captain 3 seem to hang out in Alterna, Cuttlefish and Octavio only seem to stay on the surface, which got me thinking. Maybe Alterna is only one side of the single player, where parts of the Splatlands might be an additional hub world for the story mode, with possibly separate storylines with Quake and Octavio that might only converge further down the line. Seems far-fetched? I have some more clues to something like this. Taking a closer look at the levels we've seen in the story trailer, I can make out two distinct types of levels. On one side we have levels that kinda look like Octo expansion levels, at least judging by these more sterile backgrounds, and on the other side we have levels that are more colorful and have stronger visual themes like the skyline, the lanterns and arcs and whatever is going on here. These levels, it seems, are designed after real places or cultural themes or something, and possibly human artifacts. Or rather, recreations of those. Even more interesting is the fact that Agent 3 seems to always wear the winter outfit in the one type of level, and the desert outfit in the other. So not only could there be two types of levels to enter, the different outfits Agent 3 wears could also hint towards my idea of the Splatlands acting as an additional story hub world, having us enter the snowsuit levels from within Alterna, and the desert suit levels being accessible from the Splatlands. I was originally also suspecting that the different kinds of level goals we've seen might hint to different types of levels, since we've seen both Zapfishes and Octo expansion like goal points. However, in recent screenshots, we've only seen the latter type of goal in both type of levels. So either the goals will differ independently from the level type, or the Zapfish might be an additional collectible and not the main goal of the levels. Going back to Kraken Octavio, another support for the idea of extra story hub worlds is this entire area behind Crack in this screenshot, with possibly the same rock wall also being seen in this scene here with Octavio. The fact there's fuzzy ink here as well makes me hope that this is one of the additional story hub areas on the surface we might be able to explore. Also, addressing the octopus in the room, if this hero mode really was just the same old jumping over some floating platforms with the new Squid Big Splatoon again, why would those two even be here? The presence of our aging military leaders / musicians here has to amount to something bigger for the story. Assuming that Octavio won't be the villain this time, which he won't, maybe the two aren't even involved in whatever's going on in Alterna at first, and they just went to take a vacation in the Splatlands or something, because look at how they both are basically clothed like tourists. Or maybe, rather than being tourists, what if they're actually involved in some kind of archaeological project? The thing on Octavio's head might in reality be a headlamp instead of a camera, and Cuttlefish's outfit might just as well work for doing archaeological work in the desert. Also, looking at this tent behind the captain in this scene here again, this kind of tent and the location in the desert next to the rock wall looks like it could be some kind of archaeological exploration site. If true, this would be especially interesting because of something else I've been wondering about since the game was revealed. The repeated mention of Agent 3 being a scrap collector. This is something Nintendo has been mentioning since the game was first revealed, up until the recently opened Splatoon 3 website. And seeing how purpose-oriented Nintendo usually is, it would seem weird for them to keep mentioning this detail about Agent 3 making money by searching for junk with their Salmonid if it didn't have any relevance to the game. It sounds similar to how Agent 4 was described as working for Grisco to make some money on the side in this character chart. So what if this detail about Agent 3 will actually take form in a new mode or an element of the hero mode, where we would explore these different areas of the Splatlands to hunt for artifacts? Looking back at the reveal trailer, this scene might have actually been from the scrap collecting part of the game. In the case that this will be connected to hero mode, maybe this area from the first trailer isn't strictly a tutorial area, but rather one of a set of more open levels on the surface. So unlike previous games where we get a quick tutorial, get thrown into the hub world and can then choose to go turfing or start the hero mode, maybe Splatoon 3 will immediately start with the story and show us how Agent 3's day-to-day life looks like, searching the desert for junk to sell, before they make their encounter with the new Squid Big Splatoon or Cuttlefish, possibly resulting in two different segments of the single player, being the regular platforming stuff in the domes and more open exploration-based gameplay in the Splatlands. The possibility of Kraken Octavio being involved in some kind of archaeological project would also be the perfect premise for such a junk collecting element, where maybe they ask Agent 3 to explore the world, collect stuff and bring it back to them. Remember these weird masks from the Return of the Mammalians key artwork? No one knows what those are about? Maybe these masks are some of the artifacts we'll unearth, and will be important to the story progress somehow. Based on these observations, I was able to upkeep my biggest hope, which would be a kind of semi-open world with a bunch of open areas that are all connected to each other. So let's talk about another thing that I hope could hint to something like that. Splatsville. Literally, the name Splatsville. Instead of a plaza or square, the hub world is named as an entire city. Although, to be fair, we should take a look at the original Japanese names for this first. The general area where the game takes place is called Bankara, and as it turns out, the kanji used in the Japanese name for Splatsville can mean both street or town. So, that doesn't help much. It is possible they had rather the street in mind, so another name for the hub world could have been Splatsville Street, which would be more in line with Inkopolis Square or Plaza. But even then, looking at Splatsville, we can see that it is much more than just a street already, as we've seen so many areas and alleys that make this hub world seem more like an entire chunk of the city rather than just a street. Then there's also the naming of the Splat lands, which, this time less ambiguously, is also called Bankara region in Japanese. So instead of a plaza or square in a city, we have the entire city already within an even bigger region, which could hint towards bigger areas around Splatsville being accessible. Also, we can see something that looks like a train station next to the turf war lobby in this screenshot here. If it's actually usable, maybe it could serve as a mechanic to get around the Splatlands and visit the different areas that might be explorable. Assuming that this train ride sequence from the first trailer will be in the actual game, this may also be where we get off the train when first arriving in the city. And speaking of transportation, this area looks like it could be a scooter landing site or something. Maybe we'll actually be able to drive around the city with them, or even through the other potential areas. If there's really going to be big explorable areas, this might be a handy way to quickly traverse them. This might be too much of a stretch though. Going back to the single player levels in the domes for a moment, I mentioned earlier how some of them might be accessed from the Splatlands because of the desert outfit Agent 3 is wearing, and how those specific levels all seem to be themed of the cultural stuff. Maybe these levels reflect the part of the Splatlands the level is accessed from. For example, the skyline level might be entered in a busy part of the city. The lantern level could represent a part of the city where this kind of architecture and decoration is present, and this level may be found in the desert, farther away from the city. There are also indications that the Splatlands may be more ecologically diverse than we might have assumed at first. I was originally a bit worried about the desert theme of the game, since I thought the maps would be pretty boring if they all had the same kind of desert background. However, the recent Turf War trailer showed us that the map Eeltail Alley seems to feature a bridge over some canal. And looking into the distance, it also seems that we can see the ocean on the horizon. And then there's that new render from the hub world where we have palm trees now. So maybe the Splatlands aren't too far away from the ocean, and there might even be some tropical themes here. It got even more interesting when the official Splatoon Twitter posted this tweet. Curiously, this magazine showcasing the new brand Barasushi features photo shoots in a snowy area, which is interesting because there's no dome in the background. Which means that this isn't Alterna, but an actual cold area in the Splatlands. It might be implied that this area could be in the west of the Splatlands, as the Japanese Twitter mentioned the brand originating from there. There's also the possibility though that this is Alterna after all, and they just removed the dome to make these images, and the area doesn't really exist or show up in the game, but for speculation and coping reasons, let's assume that this might really be another biome in this game. We could see some maps located in snowy areas, which would greatly increase the variety of maps, and seeing how open this area seems to be, maybe this is another explorable level that might lay on the way to reaching Alterna. So Alterna might not be underwater or underground, but could just be a climate dome built on the surface in a snow desert. And looking at these images, the dome really does look more like it's made out of glass and not screens projecting a fake sky or something. It also seems like there's mountains stretching beyond the dome as well. So instead of just traveling to the story hub world through a manhole, Alterna may be more naturally connected to the rest of the world, since it could just be located in the Splatlands as well. Or in other words, there might not be such a big divide between the hub world, the story and so on, but rather the game world as a whole could be more connected, with the story possibly taking place all over the game's world, and not just in a contained part of it, so to speak. And akin to that, there also seems to be a trend where the devs might try to make the game world feel more immersive in general. For example, by possibly getting rid of abstract menus like found in previous games. We see the character creation take place in the Splatlands instead of a simple menu like in the past, And we have this elaborate cutscene of players flying onto the scene in Salmon Run, which might serve as the background for the matchmaking screen. Then there's also hints towards phones being a thing, which could replace the main menu of the game in a similar way Animal Crossing New Horizons handles it, which might be supported by this find of Rassicas on the Splatoon 3 website, where some of the background art depicts status symbols from a phone. There was also speculation about this screenshot, which looks like it would show the Salmon Run lobby, but at the same time, the reward counter is here. This led some to believe that you might actually be able to move inside the lobby, which could mean the devs also want to get rid of these static menu areas you would find yourself in with the previous games, by possibly integrating these areas into the hub world, or at least having a navigable separate area. We're also seeing something similar in this recent brand showcase tweet, where it is very likely that we're looking at the exterior and interior of the shoal. With how detailed these couches are, maybe it's not just meant to be a background element, but it could hint to the interior of the shoal being navigable. My hope is that this might get so far that we will be able to freely navigate in all kinds of areas, like the shops as well. And yes, maybe we will actually see customizable apartments this time around. Apartments would be a perfect way to replace the equip menu, which has just been a colored background up until now. Apartments are definitely a more niche thing people have been hoping for though, and I think that it might be the crossover of Splatoon and Animal Crossing fans mostly hoping for this, which I can attest I'm a fan of both, and I'd absolutely love having an entire Animal Crossing-like element to the game when it comes to having a customizable apartment and other stuff you can do in the hub world. And speaking of, there already is a concept in the game that borrowed from Animal Crossing New Horizons, which is the title system that allows you to mix and match descriptions for your character. The interesting part about that is the fact that in Animal Crossing, these titles were unlocked for completing certain Nook Miles achievements, which immediately had people speculating that Splatoon 3 might also feature some kind of achievement system. And beyond that, it could also mean that there might be a whole lot of stuff you can do in the game beyond the multiplayer this time, which would warrant a bunch of related titles to be unlockable. For example, there's Man O' Wardrobe Regular, which, assuming Man O' Wardrobe is the name of the clothing store, might be unlocked by entering the shop many times, or spending a certain amount of money there. However, the tweet said that you'll unlock more words the more Turf War you play, which worries me. They'll just be unlocked at random by battling after all, but I want to believe they only said this because Turf War was the focus of the other news back then, and they wanted to concentrate on that. So maybe battling is one, but not the only way to unlock some of these titles. So between the size of the hub world, the potential amount of exploration in it, and also all the other shops we don't even know what they might be for, I think it shows that the devs are really putting a lot of work into the environments and scope of the accessible world in this game. Together with the amount of mystery around many things regarding the hero mode, I think that it isn't completely impossible that some of my theories and ideas here might come true. The gem collecting concept in big open levels would work well as the big new thing for the game, like what Salmon Run was for Splatoon 2 for example, as we haven't seen any drastically new modes for the game yet. However, I do know that I'm kinda grasping onto straws here, and that it is entirely possible that the single player won't nearly be as crazy and big as I'm theorizing, but I still want to hope. As we might be right around the corner of a Nintendo Direct during what was once E3 season, let's also hope this video won't immediately have aged like milk.